Hello and welcome back, everyone. It's John Pollock here alongside Cody Saftic, and we are going to be chatting about the latest involving Mark Hunt. He was on the MMA Hour this week giving an update on his current battle he's having, and I don't think there's any other word to describe it, Cody, with the UFC and with the way that they are handling the punishments of fighters that are failing drug tests. And Mark Hunt has had a number of fights now where that's been the case with his opponent after the fact. And Brock Lesnar being the latest. It's a hearing that continues to be put off. And Mark Hunt is stating that if he's going to fight again, he wants the provision in this contract that if his opponent ends up popping, he wants them to be paid nothing and he wants to receive their purse. Is this a winnable fight for Mark Hunt? And is the UFC even entertaining this option?
This is not a winnable fight by him. By all stretch of the imagination, it seems like he's moving towards this make a union, because that's union claims. And he's a guy that's in his mid-40s at this point. He's not going to challenge for a title again anytime soon. So why not make that your calling card? Why not be the union guy? But you have to remember, going into that fight, it was already declared that he was going to have this exemption for, you know, not steroids necessarily, but that Brock was jumping into a smaller testing pool than the regular guys for the 4 months for the USADA.
Which in hindsight was a mistake.
Which is a mistake. And Mark Hunt knew that mistake and went on and quoted, "I'm going to smash this juice head." So now you lose to this guy, and now you're saying, well, he was on steroids. You knew what you're getting yourself into. You knew the provisions of the contract for Brock Lesnar, and once you lose, now you're saying, well, I want that money. And he's saying the same thing. I still want a chunk of Brock Lesnar's money after this hearing, and I'm going to make this big announcement. I understand it, but it seems to me like he's fighting for regulations for the fighters, and that's not a bad thing, John. But this is not a winnable fight by one man all by himself. He needs the rest of the roster to rally behind him.
I agree with that. I feel, though, there is a difference from Mark Hunt making those accusations ahead of time that are unfounded and concrete evidence that this was a guy that ended up failing his test. So I think that there is a big difference there. And it's interesting the fact that Mark Hunt does feel like he is fighting this solo. And that's always been, to me, one of the issues with fighters joining together, whether it's as a collective whole, whether it is as a formal union. It's very much individualized. And Mark Hunt it's unfortunate there aren't a numbers game that want any ratifications to the protocol that's in place. And maybe Mark Hunt, it's a pretty hardline stance he is going towards, one that I don't see fighters ended up getting paid as a result of another guy failing. But also, we're seeing some big suspensions being thrown out, and some you would disagree with. I think Frank Mir has a very valid case, and one that it doesn't look like he's going to be able to fight in the UFC again as a result of.
Well, certainly with Frank Mir's age, I mean, the question of him returning is going to be same thing with Lyoto Machida. Looking at it and saying, wow, a 2-year suspension, that's a long time. That's going to take this guy out. Fair. Then you look at a guy like Kelvin Gastelum and gets 6 months for no showing a weigh-in. So at what point do you think, well, what's the rule on suspensions? What does every fighter get? And is there a certain thing where if you test positive for anabolics, you're going to get it longer than if you test positive for a diuretic? It's just because every commission has to regulate themselves. So they're not on the same page. When you look at someone like Mark Hunt has fought a lot of guys that have tested positive in the past, and he's upset about that, and I totally understand that. But look at a guy like Michael Bisping. He was in the same boat. He's losing to guys that have these TRT exemptions. But he doesn't say, oh, you know what, I'm not fighting these guys anymore. He just says, I want this to be a cleaned up sport. As a result, he's the champ now. Now they give him someone like Yoel Romero, and he says, I don't even want to fight this guy. You can't pick and choose. You're a prize fighter. You're getting in there. You have to be aware of some of the guys that are in your division and what they may or may not be on. But at the end of the day, this is what you signed up for. Mark Hunt's a guy that used to fight in Japan. There was no testing in Japan. He never complained about that. But now that he's in his 40s, and now that he's starting to sustain a lot of damage in some of these fights, it makes sense for him to go after the biggest piece of the pie. And that would probably result in give me half of what Brock Lesnar had, or more. To think give your entire purse away, I don't disagree with it, John. I really don't. But it's not my decision. It's not the fighter's decision. They have to come together. And when you look at these certain guys that have stood out and said, you know what, I'm going to fight, it's always solo. They never really have a gang of people behind them because those people don't want to bite the hand that's feeding them, so to speak. So I feel for Mark Hunt. I'm a big fan of him. I would love to see him get back in the cage, but he has to do what's right for himself. And this is looking like this is what he believes is the best for himself.
You brought up his age, and I think that is important to this story because this is not someone that's in their mid-20s that can necessarily look at, hey, if I want to sit out a year, that's an option for me. I mean, time is of the essence for him, and he is under a long-term UFC deal. So it's not as though he has the option to just go somewhere else. Do you see an end result where it's just a resolution of Mark Hunt giving in and this is someone that has to make a living like everybody else, or is this something where you could see the UFC just wanting to part ways with Mark Hunt, let him out of his contract, and he could go to a Bellator, he could go to a Ryzen? What do you forecast as the likely outcome?
Mark Hunt and Bellator or Ryzen, great. Not going to happen. This guy re-signed, I believe, a 6 or 8 fight deal with the UFC, and they had even gone out on record to say, we want Mark Hunt to retire with us. And Dana always says that great story. You know, we tried to buy this guy off, and he wanted to stay with us, and we're glad to have him here. He's going to end his career here. They're not letting this guy yet.
Well, we've gone
he took one fight.
We got the 180. Now he wants
deal.
out.
Now he wants out.
He'd probably buy them out if he could.
And that's the thing with dealing with fighters. On one hand, they're like, I'm so happy to be here. This is the best part of my life. And then one fight later, one fight removed from that, it's, ooh, you know what? Greener pastures in Ryzen right now where I can go fight Fedor again. It's not going to happen. I love Mark Hunt. I hopefully that this comes to a mutual understanding and everyone can resolve this issue. I'd love to see him back in the ring, don't get me wrong. But this is going to be a tough one. And because of his age, he needs to settle a lot sooner than other guys were. He can't sit this year on the sidelines unless he's full blown, I'm retiring and I want to be this union guy. Otherwise, I would assume he has a provision in his contract saying he can't kickbox either. So he's in a really tough spot right now.
My final point is I applaud the guy for being vocal about this. There's a lot of fighters who we will hear privately talk about their problems, and then publicly it's a completely different tone and stance. So Mark Hunt, he's kind of been alone on this topic in terms of being this hardline towards it, but he's vocalizing his opinions, and I applaud the man for that. That is going to wrap it up for us. For Cody, I am John, and we will chat with you next time.